Episode 5. Swallow Door. The hidden seam did not shut like a door. It swallowed the corridor whole. 1 second there was the red wash from the prayer wall leaking through the narrowing crack, the measured boots of the quiet men turning toward false light, Naomi's hand locked around Zora's wrist hard enough to bruise. The next second the seam slammed home and the sound changed shape. What remained on their side of it was not silence. It was burial. Thick, old, pressed silence. The kind that had spent years under concrete, learning how to hold screams without giving any of them back. Zora hit the inner wall with her shoulder and nearly lost the lantern before she tightened her grip. The red glow under the cloth flared once, then drew itself smaller, as if the dark in here had rules of its own and expected light to behave. Naomi did not let go right away. "Don't talk." The order came out low enough to feel like part of the air rather than speech. She listened with her whole body, head tilted, baton up, one hand still on Zora, as if the stare itself might answer differently depending on whether it thought they were prey or trespass. The stare dropped hard to the right and vanished into black below them. The walls were older than the station. Zora felt that through the soles of her shoes before she touched anything. Concrete showed only in patches, brick lived under it. Iron ran naked where later builders had tried and failed to claim the structure cleanly. The handrail beside her had been worn to a dull softness in the spots where other hands had gripped it too hard going down. Soot lived in the corners. Moisture lived everywhere else. Naomi finally let go and went down first, sideways, baton lifted. 3 steps, she whispered, landing, then 7. The 4th one gives if you trust it. Zora stared into the dark. That sentence is not helping. That's because you're still trying to use stairs like the city built them. The line would have sounded crueler from somebody else. From Naomi, it sounded like instruction wrapped in a habit of surviving alone. Zora moved. The first 3 steps held. The landing was narrower than it looked, brick sweating cold through the knees of her jeans. Then the next run. 1, 2, 3. On 4, the stair did exactly what Naomi said and shifted under her weight with a soft downward sigh, not collapsing, only reminding her that trust was too blunt a word for places like this. The red lantern made the walls look wounded. Behind the sealed seam, something struck metal once. Not a boot, not a ram, a tool, slender and patient, testing the join Naomi had closed behind them. The quiet men had reached the prayer wall. Zora almost looked back on reflex. Naomi's came up from the next landing before the thought finished. "Keep your face forward." The stair turned again. The deeper they went, the stranger the air became. The station above had carried people in it, soup, socks, soap used sparingly, sleep, heat stored by too many bodies too close together. This place carried absence, old dust, wet iron. Ash rubbed so deep into the pores of the wall it had become part of the material. And under that, something else, a sweetness gone stale with time. Burned paper maybe, or flowers left too long in a room nobody came back for. The stair gave them another landing, and then a corridor cut straight through old brick. Naomi stopped. Only then did she let herself breathe audibly. Zora stayed where she was, one hand still wrapped around the lantern handle. Her shoulder throbbed where the chamber fall had packed impact into bone. Her ribs remembered the scan too vividly. The route in the walls pulsed at the edge of her body, not bright enough to see, but present enough that every surface felt a fraction more awake than stone should. Naomi turned and looked at her properly for the first time since the seam shut. What did the wall say? The question came too fast to pretend it wasn't fear. Zora looked past her into the dark, because answering directly made it feel more final than the plaster had any right to be. It warned me. That's not what I asked. No. Zora swallowed once, throat dry with old dust. It isn't. Naomi took 1 step closer. The lantern sharpened half her face and left the other half in shadow. She could have been 17 or 27 and worn down thin by tunnels. The only thing that read clearly was pressure. What did it say? Zora thought of the red fragments in the prayer wall. Mother, line / not clean. Thought of Denise's hand almost touching her and stopping. Thought of Malik tearing through walls and roots just to stay long enough to warn. It named the mother line. Naomi's expression didn't move. That was worse than surprise. And? Zora shifted the lantern in her hand. And it warned it wasn't clean. The old corridor received that and kept it. Naomi, once through her nose. Not relief, not confirmation, something more complicated. The wall doesn't do straight answers. You seem to understand it fine. I understand that it likes making people choose the ugliest version first. That should have helped. It didn't. Zora heard the faint tool sound again, far back beyond the sealed seam. The quiet men were still working the prayer chamber. Not loud enough to mean panic, not slow enough to mean they were fully fooled. Time had narrowed. You still brought me through, she said. Naomi's eyes flicked toward the stair behind them, then back. Because it warned before it chose. That matters. Zora looked ahead. The corridor ran straight for 30 feet before the dark Bennett left. Route numbers had been written on the brick in grease pencil decades apart, one hand over another, until the wall carried generations of direction layered into near illegibility. A rusted prayer token hung from a nail hammered into mortar too old to hold nails properly. Beside it, somebody had tied a strip of blue cloth faded almost gray. What is this place? Naomi turned and started walking again. Swallow door. That's not a place, that's a threat. Exactly. Zora followed because the corridor gave her no version of standing still that counted as safety. The city sealed these stairs before redevelopment finished tracing the district, Naomi said. People kept using them anyway. Names go in, sound goes in, roots go in. If you know how to move, the door keeps the surface from hearing you. If you don't, it keeps you from being heard when it matters. That's not a door. No. Naomi did not look back. It's a mouth. The line hooked cleanly into Denise's warning from before. Some doors don't open, they swallow. Denise had known exactly what kind of door she meant. The corridor narrowed, then widened into a low utility room whose original function had long ago been taken over by need. Shelves cut from old signal crates held candle stubs, transistor parts, maps folded into squares small enough to hide in clothing, bundles of dried herbs wrapped in newspaper gone soft from damp. A sink had been bolted to one wall and no longer connected to any visible pipe, yet the basin still held a rust line as if water remembered it. On the floor sat an overturned chair with one leg splinted in copper wire. Naomi went straight to a locker hanging crooked near the far wall and hit its side twice with the baton handle. The locker answered with a soft release. Inside waited a cloth-wrapped packet, a half-dead battery, a wax paper box of matches, and a small reel-to-reel tape recorder so old it looked improvised from grief and stubbornness. Zora stared. That still works. It works enough. Naomi lifted the battery first, tested the contacts by thumb, and fed it into the recorder with practice pressure. What is it? Naomi set the machine down on the chair, listening to its weight. A room farther in doesn't like strangers. That's not an answer. It's the one you get while we're being followed. Fair. The recorder clicked alive with a tired internal whir. Naomi didn't move right away. Her hand stayed on the casing a second too long. My mother used to run these stairs. The sentence changed the room. She kept her eyes on the recorder as she spoke, as if work made the memory less likely to turn and bite. She moved people during blackouts, medicine, kids, names when families had to split and one route couldn't carry them all. Reuben held north platforms. She ran south. Zora leaned against the sink because standing in the middle of somebody else's history felt like volunteering for it. The iron edge bit through her sleeve. And Denise. Naomi's jaw set. Used to come through with them. There it was. Not rumor. Not undercity gossip. Bone. Zora looked at Naomi. You knew her before she went above. Naomi, once without humor. Everybody below knew everybody until the city taught us what separation could buy. What happened? Naomi fed threadbare tape through the machine's wheel. A route failed. Her fingers paused. Or a deal succeeded. Depends who writes the report. The quiet behind them thickened. The quiet men touched metal again somewhere distant. Even swallowed by stair and corridor, the patience in it carried. Naomi finally looked up. I don't need you to trust me. I need you to stop wasting time pretending the wall could only be talking about one thing. She nodded toward the stair behind them. Your mother knows these doors. The city uses blood and memory like keys. The wall likes fear because fear simplifies people. Zora looked down at the lantern. The cloth around the glass had dried stiff with soot and other hands. Her fingers still smelled faintly metallic from the root. If the wall lies, it doesn't lie, Naomi corrected. It chooses. Same difference. No. Naomi wound the tape tighter. One wants to fool you, the other wants to survive you. The recorder clicked, fully alive. Naomi lifted it and nodded toward the far corridor. Come on. The room beyond the utility space felt older, in a way that changed the route under the walls. Less station now, less transit. The corridor brick had been laid by people who still expected time to move differently. Arches narrowed overhead. Small iron vents high in the wall exhaled cold air from places Zora could not map in her head. The floor changed from cracked tile to worn stone, polished smooth down the center by generations of feet, fear, and repetition. This part of the swallow door had not been made as an emergency measure. It had been made on purpose. Naomi stopped before a second door. This one was wood under iron bands, swollen with age and split near the base. A church door buried under a transit district and denied the dignity of decay. Symbols had been cut into the wood and then half obscured by later scratches. 2 transit tokens pressed into the lintel above it like eyes. Naomi set the recorder on the floor and pressed play. At first, Zora heard only hiss. Then a low recorded voice emerged through static and age, speaking not words but route numbers in an old cadence, like directions given as prayer. The door answered. Not by opening, by settling, a small change in pressure, the kind of room response Naomi must have meant. Go slow, Naomi said, and don't touch the center wall before I tell you. Why? Because if the room likes you more than it should, we both spend the night regretting it. Naomi pushed the door. It opened inward on a chamber no larger than a classroom and twice as burdened. Candles dead for years had melted into shelves along the walls. The ceiling arched low and blackened where smoke had once gathered long enough to stain stone permanently. Rows of old wooden drawers lined the far wall from floor to shoulder height, each marked not by number but by symbols scratched in with knife points, transit punches, nail heads. No official system. A system that had survived because it refused to be one. At the center stood a table. Not black glass, not polished tech, just wood, scarred, ringed, worn smooth where too many hands had returned to the same places. A brass strip ran through the middle of it, inset flush and dark with age. Beside the table sat an old ledger, swollen by damp and time, strapped shut with a belt cut from transit seat leather. The room held itself differently around Zora. Not warmer. More attentive. Naomi felt it too. She didn't bother hiding it. This is Bloomhouse, she said quietly, or what's left of one room of it. The name moved through Zora before it settled into language. Static Bloom. Bloomhouse. Memory not as city weapon first, but something older, communal, human. A structure made to keep what shouldn't be taken cleanly. What is it? Naomi shut the door behind them and listened to the latch settle. It's where they used to keep names from being taken. The sentence did more damage than if she had explained it cleanly. Zora looked at the drawers, the table, the ledger. You mean records? Naomi shook her head. No. Just that. No. A refusal strong enough to be a definition. She crossed to the drawers and ran 2 fingers over the scratched symbols. When the city started burying routes and moving people through redevelopment intake, folks below built analog memory houses, rooms off-grid, rooms no scanner could parse clean, places where family lines, witness histories, route patterns, and the names the city wanted softened into numbers got held by people instead of servers. Her fingertips stopped at one drawer marked with a punch circle inside a square. Then the city learned the same structure could be stolen, flattened, weaponized. That's what chambers are, not invention. Her voice thinned. Capture. Zora heard Malik in that. Not in exact wording, in the shape of the anger. They built this to predict us, copy us, press us flat until it sounds like procedure. Her eyes moved to the table and held. There was paint on the edge. Not much. Metallic, dried thin into the grain. Her breath caught in the smallest possible way. Naomi saw it. He was here. Not a question. Naomi's gaze flicked to the mark and away, as if looking directly at proof of Malik in this room cost her in a way she did not enjoy showing. Once. Maybe twice, long enough to touch things and leave everybody else with the cleanup. That sounded like affection and anger badly disguised as practical complaint, which made it credible. Zora stepped to the table anyway. The paint mark was exactly the wrong kind of familiar. Metallic mix worked down thin, thumbed at one edge because he had never once sealed a jar right in his life. The air above the wood held old paper, damp leather, brass, and the faint chemical ghost of Malik's paint. He had stood here. He had breathed here. And then he had left this room to get caught by a city that could wear his face back at her. Naomi came around the other side of the table slowly, like approaching a half-wild thing. If you touch that before the ledger opens, the room will choose for you. What does that mean? It means Bloomhouse doesn't separate need from inheritance very well. She rested one palm on the leather strap around the ledger. And tonight you have too much of both. The recorder outside the door kept whispering route prayer through static. Somewhere farther out, swallowed by layers of wall, the quiet men were still in motion, not close, not gone. Zora kept her hand above the paint mark. What did Malik come here for? Naomi's fingers tightened on the strap. Names. Whose? Naomi met her eyes. Children. The word changed the room. The intake list from the chamber opened in Zora's body all at once. Rows of names, ages, statuses, route tags. Children. Malik had come here for what the city took. Did he get them out? Naomi pulled the strap loose. The leather gave with a sound like old skin. No. The ledger opened part way. Not by force, by permission granted reluctantly. Pages thick with damp and time. Handwriting layered over handwriting. Different inks, different pressures, corrections, symbols, transit punch marks, route references that meant nothing to Zora yet and everything to the room. Names written full, names written as initials, some crossed through once, some twice, some ringed in pencil dark enough to nearly tear the paper. Naomi did not flip fast. That was the breathing room Bloomhouse demanded. One page, another, margin notations, a child's full name underlined 3 times, a route reassignment, a shelter shift, a delay mark, A page where the handwriting changed halfway through because the first hand had stopped and another had taken over. At the top of one older sheet, in script gone faint with damp, East intake, delayed. Below it, names, children, family lines, route notes. And there, Vale, Mara, runner/Southhold. King, Denise, transferred above /return access limited. Zora read the second line once, then again. Transferred above. Not hired later. Not merely a woman who took a city job because mold and rent and fear had crowded out alternatives. Below first. The warning in the prayer wall changed shape under that, not because it cleared Denise, because it made the wound older. Naomi watched the line land and did not look away. Now you understand why I don't like her touching doors. Zora didn't answer. Naomi turned one more page. The handwriting changed. This page was newer, sharper, Malik's hand. That hit instantly, not because of the letters themselves, but because they carried his pressure. Too quick at the turns, a little crowded where he had written faster than thought. One word carved over itself because he'd changed his mind and refused to rewrite the line. There were only 3 sentences. If this opened for you, I didn't make it back clean. Don't trust any story that arrives polished. If the wall names Mother, ask what she was built to open. The room disappeared for one dangerous second. Not literally. Zora just stopped feeling it because all her attention had gone to the word built. Not who she betrayed. Not whether she loved them. Not even what she signed. Built. Naomi read the line over her shoulder and went still enough that Zora could hear the tiny movement of the old house settling around them. He knew. He guessed. Naomi looked at her. He was in this room and came back out of it with his skin still on. That counts as more than guessing. Maybe. The page beneath Malik's note held another mark. Same punched circle inside a square that Naomi had touched on the drawers. Beside it, a route notation in different handwriting, older than Malik's, younger than the main ledger. Garden access, mother lock. The phrase sat there and spread. Mother lock. No wonder the wall had written what it wrote. No wonder Naomi had looked afraid when Denise insisted on coming. The recorder outside hiccuped. Then kept playing. Lower now. Not battery death, distance. Something in the corridors beyond Bloomhouse had changed the way sound was traveling. Naomi heard it too and crossed to the door in 2 steps, ear turned to old wood. Their pattern moved. They found us? No. Naomi's face sharpened. Worse. Zora stood too fast and the room tilted. She caught the edge of the table before the dizziness could make a fool of her. What's worse? Naomi turned back. They stopped chasing the false trail. The sentence landed like bad air. They know we're not there. Or they got what they needed from the prayer wall. Zora looked down at the ledger, at Malik's handwriting, at Denise's old line, transferred above, at the newer notation naming a mother lock tied to something called garden access. Still not enough. Already too much. What is the garden? Naomi's mouth flattened. You keep saying that like it's a place. Reuben reacted to it. The wall reacted to it. This says it has a mother lock, so tell me. Bloomhouse listened. Naomi did not like giving the word shape in this room. That was obvious. It's the oldest part of the network, she said at last. Older than the district lines above it. Older than most of the routes the city still thinks it owns. It's where the first keepers hid memory when redevelopment started eating blocks and calling it progress. A beat. It's also where the city finished building the parts of the system it couldn't admit started below. Zora thought of the chamber, the glass, the names, the bloodline geometry, and under it all, an older room built by people trying to keep names from being taken. You mean Voss built the city system out of this? No, Naomi's expression went colder. I mean, people like Voss are what happens when somebody finds a refuge and mistakes it for a prototype. That line belonged to Malik too. It fit his anger so cleanly she almost looked for him in the room by reflex. The recorder outside stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The kind of stop that meant a hand had touched it. Naomi was at the door before Zora took her next breath. She killed the lantern with one thumb and drew the baton up in the same motion. The room went black except for the thin red thread still leaking from the cloth-wrapped lantern and the paler gray of stairlight seeping under the bottom edge of the door. A shadow crossed that seam. One person. Maybe. Or something close enough to a person to use a doorway. Naomi did not move. Neither did Zora. The ledger lay open on the table between them, like a wound that had finally decided to speak and regretted it instantly. Then came a voice through the wood. Not the calm man from the prayer wall, not one of the quiet men. Dre. Muffled by old door and swallowed corridors. Fast breath under the whisper. Zora. Her body reacted before thought did. Naomi caught the front of her hoodie and held her in place. Dre again, softer now, and wrong because she could hear him trying not to sound afraid. Don't answer the first voice you know. Naomi's grip tightened. The seam under the door darkened as the shadow on the other side shifted. Then Denise's voice came through from farther back in the corridor. Not loud, not panicked, urgent in the way she only got when control had already failed and she was pretending it hadn't. Zora, open the door. The prayer wall had warned the mother line. Malik had warned the mother line. Loomhouse had named a mother lock. And outside the room, one voice she trusted and one voice she loved were standing in different positions on opposite sides of the same impossible choice. Naomi put her mouth near Zora's ear without taking her eyes off the door. If you open that before we know who the house is hearing, it won't matter which one is lying. The shadow at the bottom of the door held. Then the knob moved. Not fast, not force. A careful turn, as if the hand on the other side expected Bloomhouse to recognize it. The latch gave halfway. And from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, lower than the city, lower than the station, lower even than the swallowed stair that had brought them here, a mechanism woke with the long iron groan of something sealed for years, finally being called by its right name.
Sequence archived. To continue the record, activate subscription.
Episode 6, Motherlock. The knob moved like it already knew the room. Not a rattle, not a shove. A careful turn, measured enough to imply patience, as if the hand on the other side had all the time in the buried city and expected Bloomhouse to remember it by touch. The latch gave halfway. Naomi's fingers locked harder into the front of Zora's hoodie. Not enough to hurt, enough to tell her body where panic was not allowed to go. At the bottom of the door, a pale strip of corridor light held steady. One shadow crossed it, broke, multiplied, became one again. The old wood swallowed details and gave back only shape. Outside, Dre's voice came first. Don't answer the first voice you know. Muffled by thick wood and older walls. Fast breath under the whisper. Wrong in the exact way fear made people aim for ordinary and miss. Then Denise's, from farther back in the corridor, low and controlled in the way her voice only got when control had already broken somewhere deeper, and she was forcing the rest of herself to stand in for it. Zora, open the door. Ugh. The old mechanism beneath the floor groaned again. Not the house settling, not pipe stress, something large, iron, vertical, hidden deep enough that the sound reached them with old dirt still clinging to it. The ledger on the table quivered once and then held still. Naomi did not move. Neither did Zora. The room had shrunk around the seam under the door and the long brass strip in the table. Every drawer in the far wall seemed to be waiting with the same patience as the hand on the knob. Outside, Denise said her name again, softer, more dangerous for it. Naomi leaned in so close, Zora felt the breath of the words rather than heard them. If you move before I tell you to move, I'll drag you to the floor and let the house judge us both. The line should have sounded dramatic. It didn't. Naomi didn't waste drama on rooms like this. If she said Bloomhouse judged, then Bloomhouse had already been taking measurements. The knob eased back. Not released. Held. A person touching it lightly enough to say, I can wait. Zora stared at the corridor light seam until her eyes hurt. The wax in her ears softened the room just enough to make her own blood audible. Every pulse reached her throat and came back sharper. Outside, Dre tried again. Okay, I know this is bad timing for nuance, but if the room is listening, I need it officially on record that I am very much myself and very much against whatever is happening. That was Dre. Too fast, too earnest under the joke, too scared to hide it as well as he wanted to. Naomi's gaze flicked once toward the door. What do you hear? Zora whispered. Not enough. That's not useful. It's not for you. Naomi let go of her hoodie at last and moved along the side wall in 3 silent steps. Beside the door, hidden in stone that had been painted and repainted until the surface stopped pretending to be flat, her fingers found a metal plate sunk flush beneath soot and dust. She pressed one corner, then another, then dragged her thumb over a seam Zora would never have seen on her own. A slit opened at eye height in the wall beside the door. Not in the wood. In the stone. Bloomhouse had been built to look without offering itself. Naomi leaned to the slit without touching the door. What do you see? Zora asked. Naomi didn't answer for 3 breaths. 2 bodies. Dre and Denise? Maybe. The word landed and stayed there. Zora hated how much of the underground lived inside maybe. Naomi drew back from the slit and studied the room for half a second, as if the drawers or the ledger might object to what came next. Then she put her eye back to the gap and called, low and flat, Dre. The reply came instantly. Yes. Don't. A beat, then an offended whisper that sounded more real than the first line had. Okay, great, helpful. Naomi's mouth nearly moved. That nearly did more to convince Zora than the answer itself. Naomi changed angle. What did you hide under the stove bricks? Phone, Dre said at once, wrapped in the burner rag because apparently even now I respect electronics having dignity. Naomi closed the slit halfway. Not trust, consideration. What does that mean? Zora asked. It means the house isn't hearing a clean copy. That still doesn't mean it's him. No. Naomi's hand stayed at the stone. It means if it's a lie, it's a lazy one. Outside, Denise said nothing. That silence made the room worse. Silence left room for the prayer wall to write itself again from memory. Mother. Then line / not clean. Malik's line beneath it in the ledger. Ask what she was built to open. Naomi shifted and pitched her voice farther down the corridor. Denise! The answer took longer. Not because it was faked, because the person answering had to decide what shape of herself to use. I'm here. Naomi's jaw tightened. What did the prayer wall write before the hidden seam opened? The corridor light under the door remained steady. The shadow beyond it did not move. Then Denise answered with a question instead. You tell me. Naomi came off the slit at once. That did more damage than if Denise had refused outright. She doesn't know, Zora said. She knows enough not to answer a direct question with a question. That does not mean. It means the house isn't hearing her clean. The latch made another small, involuntary sound, as if the wood disliked being discussed in the same tone as a witness. Zora's throat went dry. On the table, the ledger remained open to Malik's hand. The paper looked swollen enough to tear if touched wrong. His writing cut across the page with that same crowded pressure she knew from old notes in jacket pockets and bus stop margins. If this opened for you, I didn't make it back clean. Don't trust any story that arrives polished. If the wall names Mother, ask what she was built to open. Built. The word still would not stop working at her. Naomi moved away from the slit and crossed to the far drawer wall. She opened one shallow drawer, then another, then a third hidden lower and farther in the dark. Transit tokens, wax plugs, a rusted key wound with black cord, a small brass arch charm, a strip of copper too old to shine. She took the key and the copper strip. What are you doing? Making the house stop listening at the surface. That sounds impossible. Naomi gave her a look in the dim. Impossible is what people upstairs call any structure they haven't stolen right yet. She crossed to the table and laid the rusted key directly over the brass strip inset through the wood. Nothing happened. Then she looked at Zora. I need your hand. Zora did not move immediately, not because she was refusing, because every time this room wanted her touch, the room answered with more history than she had consented to hold. Naomi's eyes narrowed. This is the part where you decide if fear gets to call itself caution. There was no good answer to that, so Zora went. She set 2 fingers to the brass. Cold. Then recognition. The heat moved into her fingertips first, then the inside of her wrists where the chamber geometry had once held and never fully left. Not the same violence as the chamber. This felt older, more selective. The table wasn't flattening her, it was weighing. The ledger lifted one page by itself and let it fall. A ripple moved through the drawers on the far wall, left to right. The mechanism beneath the floor answered. Harder now. Not fully waking, turning toward them. Outside the corridor, the patient silence changed. Bodies shifting. One presence moving closer to the threshold than before. Naomi did not look up. Keep your hand there. Why? Because the house can listen deeper than the door if it thinks the wrong people are speaking. The center wall across from the drawers answered. Not with light. With texture. Hairline cracks in old plaster widened. Dust bled out. Beneath years of soot and whitewash, older marks surfaced. Root circles, half-buried church script, transit symbols, prayer notches, a child's handprint covered badly and never fully lost. Another wall under the wall. Another room inside the room. The cracks connected. Then a vertical line appeared where no seam should have been. Naomi's breathing changed. There. The word barely had enough sound to count as speech. Zora kept her fingers on the brass because taking them off felt like dropping the room halfway through a sentence. The line in the wall deepened. Not opening yet. Listening. Outside, Dre's voice came back through the door, lower and more frightened now that the corridor had had time to become itself around him. Okay, I'm upgrading this from extremely bad to creatively bad. Naomi didn't look away from the wall. What changed? The corridor's wrong. That is not a useful sentence. Sorry, the corridor is wrong in a way that feels organized. That landed. Naomi shifted closer to the center scene. Bodies. 3 I can hear, maybe 4 if one of them's counting twice. Zora turned her head. What does that mean? Dre swallowed audibly. That means one of the quiet guys is on the floor, and I don't think the floor has finished deciding what to do with him. The mechanism beneath the room groaned again. Longer this time. The seam in the center wall split the width of a fingernail. Cold air came through. Wet stone, old root systems, That impossible winter flower scent again, weaker than it would become later, but unmistakable now that it had reached them once already. The garden. Or the first breath of it. Naomi pulled her hand off the table at once. Zora did too, a beat later. The seam held where it was, not closing, not opening further. The house had answered the deeper question. "What is it?" Zora asked. Naomi's voice came out flatter than before, more careful. The first threshold. Not the whole garden. Not the whole lock. The first threshold. Outside, the calm man entered the corridor for the first time, with his voice rather than his steps. "You're out of time." The sound of him came smooth through the wood and stone, as if carried by structure that had learned obedience faster than humanity. "We have no interest in damaging Bloomhouse." Naomi laughed once, low and disgusted. The man continued. "Your friend is alive. Your mother is alive. The route between us is the only thing keeping them that way." Dree answered before silence could do the work for the man. "Please do not let him imply things in a voice like that. It feels unhygienic." Even through the door, even under pressure, he was still Dre. The recognition moved through Zora like a hand tightening around something too sharp to hold and too necessary to drop. Naomi took the copper strip and slid it crosswise over the ledger, pinning Malik's page. "What are you doing now?" "Seeing what the house hears when we stop it from preferring surfaces." That sounded even less possible. She pressed one finger to the copper. Nothing. Then Zora felt it at the edge of her body first. A shift. Not sound. Alignment. The room deciding to hold the corridor at a different angle. And then the first false voice came. Not Dre. Not Denise. A woman's voice through the wood. Worn thin. Dry. Old enough to belong to absence. Naomi. Naomi didn't move. The voice came again. Don't let the house choose for you. A mother's grain to it, a familiarity the room had not earned. Naomi's face went white beneath the low room light. "My mother," she said. Not belief. Offense. The house had found the right wound and put on its shape without apology. Zora looked at her. "That's not real." No. But the way Naomi said it made clear that unreality did not reduce damage. Sometimes it increased it. Outside, Dre exhaled like relief and horror had met in the middle. That seems extremely illegal. "Do not joke," Naomi said. "I am not joking. I have moved on to ethics." The deeper mechanism under the floor groaned again, this time accompanied by a tiny popping sound in the wood around the brass strip. The house was not just listening now, it was deciding whether to proceed. Denise spoke again through the door. Not controlled this time, not managerial, lower, stripped. "I know what the wall wrote." Bloomhouse held perfectly still. Naomi's hand tightened over the copper strip. "How?" No answer. Then Denise again, closer than before, as though the corridor itself had shortened around her. "It wrote for me first." The seam in the center wall widened another hair. Cold air deepened. Naomi went still enough that Zora heard the tiny tick of the rusted key shifting on brass. No. Zora's pulse started hurting in her throat. Outside, the calm man did not interrupt. That was worse. It meant Denise had named something too useful for him to contaminate yet. Dre's voice came in rough and fast. "I need all of you to understand the body on the floor has started making choices." No one in Bloomhouse answered him, because all of them already understood the sentence. Denise spoke through the door once more. No armor left on it now. It called me home. Everything in the room heard that. The seam in the center wall split open 1 inch. Cold air crossed Bloomhouse, carrying wet stone, old roots, and a deeper bloom of the winter flower scent. Not a room beyond it, a system. The first throat of the garden. Naomi yanked the key off the brass strip as if it had burned her. The seam held. Not closing. Not opening further. The house wants the mother line. Or it wants the lock, Zora said. Naomi looked at her sharply. Same problem. Outside, the calm man resumed, with a patience now sharpened to knife thin. Denise, step away from the threshold. Denise did not answer him. That mattered more than anything she could have said. Dre's voice came in rougher now, one step closer to actual fear than before. We do not have long. Naomi turned toward the door, then the seam, then the ledger. The room had become a choice engine and hated everyone in it equally. No. That wasn't true. It hated simplification. That was worse. She went to the stone beside the door and worked a second hidden mechanism lower down. Not the listening slit this time. Something smaller, something older. A square viewing grill, no larger than a handspan, slid open at knee height. Cold corridor air cut into Blue Mouse. Naomi crouched and looked first. Every line in her body locked. What? She moved aside. Zora went down with the lantern in one hand and the cold from the center seam at her back. The grill gave only a narrow cut of corridor. Enough. Dre on one knee, one side of his face smeared with soot and somebody else's blood, breathing hard, real enough to hurt. Denise farther back, one hand on the wall as if holding herself upright without admitting it, her sleeve dark at the cuff, real too. And between them and the turn, one quiet man on the floor. Throat open too cleanly to have been done in panic. One arm bent wrong, one leg jammed under him, eyes open. Not dead in any settled way. Not alive in any human way either. Just held. Zora. Dre saw the motion through the grill and went visibly pale with relief. Hi, great. Love windows. Denise's eyes found Zora through the opening. No city posture, no authority, just exhaustion held upright by the last available inch of will. Behind them, farther down the corridor where the light fell thinner, something moved. Not fully into view. Just enough shadow shift to tell the room there was a fourth presence, and it had chosen not to show its face yet. Zora looked from the corpse to Denise to Dre and then back to the shape in shadow. The route in the corridor wall blushed faintly red near it, as though the structure recognized whatever stood there and didn't know yet whether to claim it. Naomi saw that too. Her voice came out low. We close the grill. But before she could move, Denise spoke through the opening. The house is hearing me wrong. Naomi looked at her. No, she said, it's hearing you too well. The corpse's fingers moved against the floor. Just once. Enough. Dre swore softly. Now would be a very good time for honesty. Denise's face changed. Not because she wanted to confess. Because the room had finally narrowed enough that refusal looked smaller than truth. She looked straight at Zora. I know what the wall wrote, because it wrote for me before it wrote for you. Bloomhouse answered with a full-body shudder. The seam in the center wall widened another fraction. The deeper mechanism beneath the room woke harder. And somewhere below all of it, iron moved against old restraint, like something buried had just been called by the right name.
Sequence archived. To continue the record, activate subscription.